Welcome to Sorghum Frontiers 2021. I'm Barry Lubbers, the Business Director for Advanta and our brand Alta Seeds. I'm excited to have you here today and watch our team demonstrate some of the best and exciting sorghum that's coming to the marketplace. Advanta has decades-long history of providing leading-edge sorghum to the grower. I'm excited to see our team in action today, showing you the newest and the best in grain sorghum and forage sorghum from Alta Seeds. You will see our lean and aggressive team in action. I think that'll resonate with many growers because much like you in your lean and aggressive operation, we have to have every employee contributing to our success, and that success will breed success for you and your operation. Remember last year, we began Sorghum Frontiers to introduce you to iGrowth, the industry's first non-GMO herbicide-tolerant sorghum. Additionally, we introduced our brand Empyr, our premier forages lineup from Alta Seeds. Everybody knows that the pandemic last year forced some unusual things. One thing for Alta Seeds is that we were no longer able to hold our in-person field tours. As a result, we switched and pivoted to virtual field tours. Our virtual field tours were such a success that we decided to go ahead and do that again this year. So, in addition to in-person, we are doing these virtual field tours so that you can see this video at any point in the future. To date, we've hosted hundreds of customers to our Sorghum Frontiers field tours to get a first-hand look at our second-generation iGrowth hybrids. Of course, many of the attendees this year have already got a first-hand experience with iGrowth by planting them on their farms this spring. For those of you that were not able to plant iGrowth this last year, rest assured that we have a great supply ready for you this spring for the 2022 planting season. I mentioned earlier that we introduced our Empyr Premier Forage Sorghum lineup last year to much success. Well, I'm very proud to announce that we've got another first this year, and that's going to be the first iGrowth Empyr Forage Sorghum in the industry. As you can tell, Advanta is a leader in the industry, and it would be really easy for us to rest on our success. I've told our team that we're not going to rest. Here at Alta Seeds, we have a sorghum team that is second to none. We have solutions for growers that no other sorghum seed company can offer. I appreciate you taking the time today to listen and see what we're bringing to sorghum growers in the United States. Now, let's take a look at Sorghum Frontiers 2021.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Barry. Like you said, we are excited to be here presenting the 2021 Alta Seeds Sorghum Frontiers Virtual Field Day, and to have you all here to learn more about what Alta Seeds is doing in sorghum development. My name is James Luce, and I'm the Digital Media Director for Bound Media Group, the parent company for the High Plains Journal. I'll be your moderator for this third edition of Alta Seeds Sorghum Frontiers Virtual Field Days. For those of you who may not be familiar with our program format, let me share some notes. First, the program will use video that has been pre-recorded with our team of experts in the field, but those experts are also with us today live to give us additional insight and be available to answer questions after the video segments. We have already turned off your video and muted your microphones, and we ask that you keep them off throughout the program. We have found in the past that sometimes people will leave and return and forget to mute, and it can be disruptive to listen to a private conversation while presenters are trying to share. To ask questions, simply click on the chat box below and type your questions in the pop-up box that appears on your screen. We may not be able to answer every single question during the webinar, but we'll have our presenters' contact information available on the registration website after this. So feel free to reach out to them with any questions we didn't get a chance to answer here live. This virtual field day will be recorded, and we will be posting it soon after on www.hpj.com/sorghumfrontiers. And the link will also be available at www.altaseeds.com. And remember, you're automatically entered into the Alta Seed giveaway. 3 prizes valued at $3,000, $4,000, and $5,000 worth of grain or forage sorghum. We will announce the winners throughout the show, so stay signed in. Alta Seeds representatives will contact winners after the show to work out details and logistics. So the next segment is jam-packed with some advice and information from many experts. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Tanner Antonick, Central U.S. Account Manager, and Dr. Zach Eder, U.S. Technology Development Manager, to talk about iGrowth, the first herbicide-tolerant grain sorghum sold in the U.S., which has already been planted on upwards of 500,000 acres in 2021. Additionally, Brian Battles and Dr. Ryan Bryant from UPL will talk about Imiflex, the companion herbicide for iGrowth. Following that, Tanner will be returning and interviewing Steve Sterling, a grower distributor in Kansas, about his experience with the Alta Seed product lineup.
Welcome to Sorghum Frontiers. This is the 4th year of our global launch of iGrowth, and we're here today in Hereford, Texas with Dr. Zach Eder to discuss the hybrids. My name is Tanner Antonick, and I'm the Central U.S. Sales Manager for our branded label, Alta Seeds.
Thanks for that introduction, Tanner. Really excited to be talking about 5 of the products we launched this year. We have 2 of the first generation iGrowth products and 3 of the second generation iGrowth products. This iGrowth herbicide tolerant trait is going to allow us to use that Imiflex herbicide from our partner UPL.
I'm going to go ahead and start off by talking about our 2 first generation products, the G1142 IG and the G2177 IG. As we've seen yields come in and out of South Texas, and we've been able to evaluate these products in the high plains, they're really performing as expected. The biggest part though is that growers are able to experience the iGrowth technology in conjunction with the Imiflex chemistry from UPL in the field. Growers have been very impressed as they've gone out and for the first time been able to have an added tool to go post-application in season to battle those troublesome grasses and weeds. Additionally, we have guys that were a little bit skeptical of the pre-emerge program, but they were able to go out, apply it early, and they saw a really good early season control that went late into the season, and they were really happy with the added grass and weed control they got. Zach, I've had growers call me from the Texas Panhandle this week, as well as Nebraska, and they've mentioned that acres have opened up that they previously could not grow sorghum on, all thanks to the iGrowth technology. So it's been very exciting. The biggest thing for me though is I've been able to use the products, the second generation products, and put them out all the way from South Texas up into Nebraska. And growers are calling and very excited about the added dimensions they give our iGrowth portfolio.
The 3 products that are going to be in the second generation are going to be the ADV G2168 IG, the 2193 IG, and the 1120 IG. I think, Tanner, these are really going to open up a lot of acres for you.
That really excites me because I did get my start in South Texas, and I do have growers down there that when we put in G1142 IG and the G2177 IG, they saw those quicken up, and they were a little too early for what those growers want to plant. As we look at these second generations, what advice would you give them? What product would you place as we look at those markets?
So in that southern market, we really define it as south of the Red River. We really like to see that ADV G2193 IG in that marketplace. It's going to be a true medium. It pairs up really well with our 1203 in that marketplace. Strong yielding environments are going to see great yield potential, and it's still tough enough to handle that upper Gulf Coast.
So as we look at the high plains in the Kansas market, growers are wanting something maybe a little more stable in maturity that starts off a little bit shorter in maturity. What advice would you give those growers?
For those growers in the Great Plains, I really want to put them on that ADV G2168 IG. This is a product that's going to have a stable maturity, and it's also going to be our first combination of the Aphix and the iGrowth technologies. The Aphix technology obviously is our sugarcane aphid tolerant products, so it's going to give a lot of protection to that grower and still give them the capability of spraying the herbicide over the top. It's going to be a Kansas champion in the future.
Yeah, Dr. Eder, I know as I've gone out and I've evaluated our sales plots in Kansas, that's a product that's really stood out to me as well. And that's one that I'm most excited about as we talk with our growers in the high plains about a staple for years to come. Now, the one product you didn't talk about is our G1120 IG. And this is one, as I go around and I meet with our retail partners or the growers in the field and I show them plot data, it's one that really pops. And it's because it's winning trials, both dry land and irrigated. What would you tell us about that product?
So the 1120 comes out of a really exciting background. It comes from our Australian genetics. So it's going to find a natural home in the Kansas market, but we're seeing broad adaptability from it. It's going to be a strong yielder on dry land and irrigated, as we're seeing in the data. It's one that we want to place on ground that finishes strong. So we maybe want to keep it off of the blow sand and keep it on a little bit heavier soil. But the 1120 is going to stretch into the southern market as well as the Great Plains and all through the southeast. It's going to be one of my personal favorites in our entire lineup.
I think the two first generation products are going to remain a staple for us, but it really sounds to me like these second generations are going to add more stable maturities and elevate our yield potential, which is really exciting. It'll help round out that portfolio. Now, Dr. Eder, as I'm visiting with my growers, I am getting three questions that pop up quite often. First is, what about trait integration? We have really good existing conventional products, and are you doing anything there to help add the iGrowth technology to some of those products that guys have known and loved? Second, what about a high yielding product that can go on high end irrigation or move east into high productive dryland soils? And lastly, what about forages? Are you working on anything there?
Those are three great questions, and I'm getting the same ones from our growers. So first, with the trait integration, we're real excited in 2022, this coming season, we're going to be looking with our growers in the field at the first of the trait integrated hybrids. So products that you see in our current lineup, those parents have been moved into the iGrowth breeding program, and we're going to have those hybrids in the field next year. The second question you had was if we're going to be moving into the high yielding environments with our full seasons. And we have two in what we're calling the third generation products. And that's the XG034 and the XG015. Those are going to be top yielding products, combining longer maturities with that yield potential. And those are going to be where we're going to go after those yield competition type acres. And the last question you mentioned is the forages. That's the most exciting one. We're launching this year in our Empyr lineup the ADVF 8484 IG, the first forage product in North America to have the herbicide tolerant iGrowth trait. So this is something that's really exciting, but I don't want to give it all away. We're going to be talking with Mark, our forage specialist, about all the cool things that are going on with that product.
That's extremely exciting to hear, and it's exciting for me on the sales side that I get to work with growers and place these products that have come out of your TD program. As we look forward to the 2022 growing season and the second year of our iGrowth hybrids out in the marketplace, we're excited to work with you to place these new products on your farm, see how they round out your portfolio and help revolutionize your acre. We hope you enjoy the rest of Sorghum Frontiers.
My name is Brian Battles with UPL, and today we're in the field with Dr. Ryan Bryant with UPL also to discuss iGrowth and Imiflex. And you know, Ryan, on the way here, just thinking about 30 years of the troublesome weeds and troublesome grasses that we've had in grain sorghum, and now it's such an exciting time that we've got something that we can really talk to the growers about and help them with another tool. So we've heard a lot of buzz about Imiflex this last year, and for those, there's probably a lot of people that haven't had a chance to be on the internet or maybe attended one of our meetings. Can you give us a really broad view of where we're at today to just really bring everybody up to speed on what's going on with iGrowth and Imiflex?
Sure. So a bit of a broad overview with Imiflex, but what Imiflex is, it is the only certified IMI chemistry for use within the iGrowth system. And Imiflex, it's a group 2 herbicide. So one of our ALS inhibitors, the active ingredient is imazamox. And what you can expect with Imiflex is grass and broadleaf weed control. And with that, you also get a really outstanding period of residual control, which really helps in terms of being able to use it as a pre-emergence herbicide or use it as a post-emergence herbicide. Whether you're using it at either of those two timings, you still get residual from that application. And so you're not just controlling the weeds you see, but you're also going to have that soil activity that will pick up those later flushes of weeds to come. As of this past December, Imiflex is fully registered. We've got to see Imiflex and iGrowth go out on hundreds of thousands of acres throughout the United States this past summer and see a lot of growers witness and experience really tremendous success with these programs. Whether that's battling some of their toughest weeds, such as Texas panicum, our grassy sandburrs, foxtails, and crabgrass, we've seen that combination of Imiflex and iGrowth provide exceptional levels of control and really bring profitable production to acres that have long been troubled to the point where that production just wasn't possible with sorghum.
Now, you talk about Imiflex, but I mean, is it Imiflex alone? Does it have to have tank partners? You know, we talked a lot about as far as a pre-application versus a post-application. Kind of tell me, and I'm going to use the term the good, better, best. What's the skinny on this?
Of course, yeah. So good, better, best may be something you've heard us reference quite a bit if you've made it to some of our talks over this past year. But really with Imiflex, employing it in a program approach is where you're really going to optimize that success of iGrowth and those herbicide applications. So having a foundation on the pre side and also utilizing a strong post-emergent program, whether you're using Imiflex pre or post, is going to be critical for that success. And those growers that have witnessed that success have really taken that mentality and employed a full program approach. And that's where we really see the flexibility of Imiflex come into play. So with Imiflex, we can apply it either as a pre-emergence application or as a post-emergence application. So we can tailor those recommendations and herbicide programs to the field and find where it fits best within the traditional use patterns of chemistries on those sorghum acres.
Dr. Bryant, we really talked about the pre and the post already, but what is the best optimal application for that grower? I mean, and let's really get past the weeds and let's get deep into really what would be the best tank partners and the chemistry to go with that pre and the potentially what may happen in a post application.
Of course, yeah. So that's something always that's really important to understand is where the herbicides and where the technologies you're using fit best. So we can very much tailor that down to a field by field case. So we'll start first with the use of Imiflex pre. So if we're using Imiflex pre, we've seen really heightened activity on some of our key weeds, such as Texas panicum and our foxtail species. And when it comes to those programs, Imiflex does really well when it's paired with another group 15 chemistry, such as Moccasin 2+, which is UPL's formulation of usmetolachlor. For heightened broadleaf activity, you can also throw in a formulation of mesotrione, such as Motif. And it's that three-way program of an Imiflex, Moccasin, and Motif that does really well from a pre-emergent standpoint in weed control. Now, if we're going for the post-application of Imiflex, we see really good success when we target those weeds when they're small. And we still need to have a good foundation in terms of a pre-emergent program. So what that'll look like is still employing a group 15 chemistry like Moccasin 2+, throw some atrazine in the tank with it and optimize our adjuvant package as well. And growers will see really good success employing those programs based on what weeds they're trying to battle.
Now, let's talk a little bit. I know we had some sensitive situations across a lot of the geography where we got some ALS resistance. Can you help me out? Give me a real good handle of what we should do in some of those ALS situations.
Of course. So ALS resistance, as we know, it's widespread throughout the United States. And battling those types of weeds, having a program approach is critical. So not relying solely on Imiflex for that program, we still want to reinforce the fact that having a comprehensive herbicide program from start to finish is where you're really going to optimize success on those acres where resistance could be an issue.
Dr. Bryant, again, we've talked about the tank partners and the importance of the tank partners and all those things in there, but I can't leave out the fact that there's got to be some surfactants in there from a standpoint of, do we do a COC, an MSO, a non-ionic? What are the situations? What are the best, again, the good, better, best on that deal also?
Of course, yeah. So just like with Imiflex and any other herbicide program, having our adjuvants in the proper place at the right time is really critical for its success. So with Imiflex, with our traditional tank mixes, what you're going to see is having a crop oil or a methylated seed oil, or MSO, in the tank at a 1 to 2% volume per volume ratio is really going to help in terms of optimizing that control, but we can't leave out the nitrogen source as well. So including AMS at about the 12 to 17 pounds per 100 gallons of water, or having UAN in the tank at about 2.5% volume per volume. Having those combinations with Imiflex and your respective tank mix partners is really where that success will be optimized. Now, there are some things we need to pay attention to though. So if mixing Imiflex with an auxin type chemistry like 2,4-D or dicamba, we want to be sure that we leave that oil component out of the tank mix and replace that with more of a non-ionic surfactant type adjuvant.
Something else I did see, and as you were talking, it kind of just brought back some memories as far as, what should be the volume? Or can we get down to 5 gallons per acre, or should we be higher up on that, maybe closer to 20 gallons per acre?
Of course, yeah. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. So Imiflex is a systemic chemistry, but still having good coverage is key. I really like to see it in at least 15 gallons of water per acre, but if we are in a no-till setting, which we do see as we move into our more northern geographies, bumping that carrier volume up to 20 gallons per acre with our respective tank mixes is really going to help in terms of getting better coverage and getting better activity, especially on our more troublesome grassy weeds that we're battling.
Dr. Bryant, we've talked about the pre, we talked about the post, but what can we expect from a standpoint of that broadleaf spectrum in efficacy of control with Imiflex and the tank partners?
Of course. So just like Brian had mentioned, we've talked a lot about grasses, and that's really what's so exciting about this technology is having a newfound ability to get after a lot of these troublesome grasses when combining Imiflex and iGrowth. But we can't overlook our broadleaf weeds. They can rob yield just as our grassy weeds do. And the great part about Imiflex is that it's not just a grass-specific chemistry. It does have really good broadleaf activity on a list of some of our most troublesome weeds. And we continue to see that success with Imiflex on both grasses and broadleaf weeds when we plug it into a program approach. Solid foundation with pre, solid foundation built on that with a post application. And whether we're plugging Imiflex in pre or post, still having that program from start to finish is where we see the best success, whether that's grass or broadleaf weeds.
Dr. Bryant, again, we've talked about the pre and we've talked about the post, but what is the best application from that standpoint that you see and what you've seen over this last year from the geography? And we've covered from South Texas all the way up to Dakota, so we're encompassing a broad spectrum area. So what have you seen that's best in that area?
For sure. So just as you mentioned, I mean, Imiflex and iGrowth, it's gone out over hundreds of thousand acres, all the way from the southern tip of Texas as we move north throughout the United States. And it's that flexibility we see with Imiflex, having the ability to use it pre or use it post, that we really want to understand and find where it fits best in our system. So with those pre-emergence applications, we definitely see a higher rate of activity, especially on our more troublesome weeds like we mentioned earlier with Texas panicum, as well as our foxtail species, to name a few. And so if we're using it in that pre-emergence application, what we really need to focus on is applying Imiflex and those respective tank mix partners before or shortly after planting, but prior to crop and weed emergence, and using it in that traditional pre-emergence timing. Now, if we go the post route with Imiflex, what's really critical is our timing in relation to that weed size. We have a wide application window with Imiflex where we can apply it before that crop even emerges, all the way up to 20 inches in height of the iGrowth sorghum. But when it comes to those weeds, we really need to pay attention to them and target them when they're small with Imiflex. So what that really looks like is applying that tank mix partner with Imiflex prior to 2 to 3 inches in weed height, having that proper adjuvant package in place, and ensuring that we've got that foundational pre-program there as well. And that's what will really optimize the control of those types of application timings with Imiflex.
Dr. Bryant, I mean, we talked about tank partners, we've talked about the chemistry, we've talked about a number of things, and as you're talking, I mean, one of the things that really popped up in my mind is the rotation and the importance of rotation and what iGrowth and Imiflex does for us in a rotation cycle. Can you kind of expand on that one for us?
Of course. So, with rotations, understanding how to properly use them and how to employ them on your field, that's going to be imperative for long-lasting weed control and sustainability of any system. And with using iGrowth and Imiflex, those traditionally will not impact any of the traditional rotations used in sorghum production. So an application of Imiflex, it still means that we have a friendly rotation interval back to cotton or corn the following year, as well as wheat if we meet certain soil and pH parameters. And what I should mention too is that if we are looking to plant any clear-filled crop, the rotation of those crops is any time following an application of Imiflex to iGrowth sorghum.
I can see where that really goes back to the good, better, best, and how that all that program literature really explains it and explains it very well. Thank you very much.
I'm here today with Steve Sterling, and we're looking at some of our new state-of-the-art upgrades we are doing this summer and getting us prepared for the next growing season. And we're here today in Hereford, Texas, looking at our warehousing and processing facility. And as we're looking through this facility, we also got a chance to talk about his experiences with Alta Seeds. He's been planting some of our products for the last several years and has had the opportunity to plant some of our iGrowth technology in our iGrowth sorghum this year. Steve, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your farm and how you got started with us here at Alta Seeds?
Well, right now, I guess I could say I'm on a third-generation farm. My father started it. I've been doing it since I got back from college, and then my son has come back, and so we've been doing it for a long time, really have.
How many acres are you looking at right now?
We farm close to 10,000 acres altogether with irrigation and dry land.
Okay, full-time job then,
Yeah,
for sure.
full-time job.
Yeah.
Dry land's a big part of our operation.
Okay,
It really is.
gotcha. So
that's where our true roots came from, was more the dry land side.
So when you're looking at your farm, then if you're primarily dry land, what qualities are you looking for in a hybrid that are going to help you out in western Kansas?
What we need in southwest Kansas, a lot of people don't understand southwest Kansas. We can be extremely dry. I think our average rainfall is only 15 inches. That 15 inches comes at the right time, we can raise as good a yields as anybody in the country. We have good soil, but we hit too many long dry spells. So we need something that's tough, but yet can still yield if we get those good years where we get some rain and everything else.
Absolutely. I know as we look down like South Texas or as we move east, we can push some hybrids that are more racehorse qualities, but the products that you're traditionally planting, those are the ones that are more workhorse varieties that year in and year out are going to make a crop.
Yeah,
So.
the only place we use any of the workhorse varieties is on irrigation. But you know, we have millions of head of cattle around. Still, as far as the irrigation part of Southwest Kansas is corn.
Absolutely.
But we're getting, unfortunately, we're losing our water, and that's something we have to pay attention to. But what a lot of guys are doing now is taking maybe the varieties that you can push, and we're starting to put them on our low watered irrigation wells and getting some pretty good top end yields out of it.
We're seeing that be pretty common as well as we look at the Texas Panhandle. A lot of those wells that used to be able to run corn, they're much lower now at half or even a quarter of the capacity they used to be.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the same thing here.
Yeah.
So looking at our conventional products, are there any that stand out to you as some of your favorites?
Yeah, we have one that it's kind of funny, but it's been on our farms about as long as I have. Started out as 5616. It's called 1153, and the thing that was beautiful about it was the standability in Southwest Kansas because of storms we can get. We need that, and that's what I'm excited about now. Is you all are taking, you know, breeding that into some newer hybrids, and hopefully we start seeing that standability, barring none, out on the market from anybody in the 1153 and a few other hybrids like that.
Absolutely. And I know one of your other favorites is 1301.
Yeah, 1301. Right? Yeah, 1301's king. It's the white Milo. You'll see it all over the country. But yeah, year in, year out, you know, it can really suck it up when it's dry and still produce sorghum. And if we get a good wet year, it will nearly run with the racehorse variety. So it really gives us a good variation and flexibility in a hybrid. Others are 1201. A lot of guys like to plant early and get it off early. That's a heck of a hybrid. It really is. It's amazing what that little 60-day Milo can yield.
Absolutely.
It can be right up there with the top sometimes. I know for about 5 or 6 years there, 1201 was third in my plot every year.
Absolutely. And I know both those products you mentioned last, the 1201 and the 1301, they're both Aphix designated products.
Yes.
Is aphid pressure a big issue for you?
It has been. You know, the last couple of years it hasn't, but we need to keep that in our pocket because, you know, I know where it's at because of my relationship with you. And at times it's gotten awful close to us, but then never made it. But if you have a hybrid out there that's not, but what will happen, like the 1150, my old favorite, you know, you're cutting and all of a sudden, you know, you see these spots, you look back across the field and there's 10 acres of aphids we didn't even know we had.
Yeah.
Because they're not in our Aphix tolerance, you know, Milos.
Yeah, and we see that a lot too, because there's certain areas, especially as we go towards drier areas, if we're down in Texas on the western side of the state, western Kansas, the Texas Panhandle, that because the yields are so variable, so dictated by the limited rainfall we have, if we have to do one application for aphids, that's oftentimes our profit margin off that acre, and we really can't afford to do that.
You're
So
exactly right.
I would say the
Exactly right.
majority of our hybrids, especially high plains, they're almost all our Aphix designated products now.
Yeah, no, that is very true. And Milo is becoming a larger, well, we've always been the heart of sorghum country. You know, people in eastern Kansas and other places raise a lot of Milo, but they don't realize how much, I mean, we're true sorghum country.
Yes.
Guys have gone to dryland Milo or corn now, especially with the Roundup Ready to help kill some of the grasses and that type of thing. But still, a year like this, you know, even with the packages that they put into the corn, the different drought tolerant corns that are out there, still Milo, the corn will die and your Milo's still green. It just is. We're sorghum country.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because it has been, corn is easier to grow. And so sorghum takes a little bit more work, a little more management. And so guys have wanted to do something a little bit easier. And so segueing into that, we did launch the iGrowth technology this year. And I know you planted a little bit on your farm. As far as that technology goes, what's your impression of it? What are you using?
We really loved it. You know, what you'll find out in our areas is we may have a couple of wet years and guys will get crazy. I mean, we'll continuous crop Milo, we'll continuous crop other things. And what this allowed us to do, we were kind of in that situation the last couple of years. This came out at the perfect time. So we were able to take our iGrowth Milo and try to get we generally do a third. So we have summer fallow out in Southwest Kansas. A lot of people don't even know what that is. But so we were able to plant the iGrowth Milo into our continuous Milo, and we were able to go out there and wipe out all of our volunteer. I was hesitant myself on whether it would kill volunteer corn. And I had actually forgot that we had a quarter and a half that was volunteer corn, or that was planted to Roundup Ready corn year before. I drove by it, and when I saw it, I was like, oh, dang. Yeah. And so my son went and sprayed it. I have a good neighbor there, a good friend, drove by it about 3 weeks later on his sprayer, and he called me. And it was kind of a funny conversation because he said, Steve, that this literally killed all the dryland corn. I said, that's awesome. Yeah. He said, why didn't you sell this to me? I said, I told you about it. You just didn't think it would, because almost all of his milo acres goes behind dryland corn. So,
Okay.
But it was good. I mean, we both learned something, because we all read labels as farmers. We read what seed companies say, everything. But we've seen enough mistakes through our years that, and maybe part of it was our fault, but still, we've seen enough that seeing is believing, and that's what this has allowed us to do. And I can tell better stories now.
Absolutely. And I know you've had some growers as well south where they got more moisture this year. They really were able to benefit from it as well.
Yeah.
And then as we move north, Kansas is a no-till area. And so when I'm talking to my guys in Texas, they're conventional till. They're running that plow 2, 3, 4 times a year. And so it's just a different world. You guys are really benefiting from this extra control we can get with Imiflex.
Yes, we really are.
As far as what you did with Imiflex, the companion herbicide to iGrowth, what were you doing? What were you putting in the tank with it to make that successful on your farm?
Mainly it was atrazine, and I think we used oil, and then we went with a relatively high rate of water. I mean, not terribly high, but 12 to 15 gallons of water, and it did a wonderful job. I think we added some 2,4-D to it.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
Now, one of the things that we've been impressed by and we've been proud to show off to our customers is the lack of crop response and the crop safety that the Imiflex gives. Oftentimes when you go out with the post-emerge program, you really burn the sorghum out there in the field. You might set it back a little bit. Yeah. Did you see the same thing?
We saw nothing. I mean, you question whether you sprayed it or not. And it's kind of what people need to keep in mind, it's a little bit of a slow reaction on grasses. You can go out and spray pigweeds or something with 2,4-D or whatever you're used to using, and by 3 hours later you'll start seeing some of that wilting. Well, when we first did it, and a lot of people, a lot of neighbors, they call me up, man, Steve, we don't see anything, and I said, we'll give it time, because I'm not seeing anything either. I was like about ready to call you.
Yeah.
And but anyway, so after a week to 10 days, then you start seeing the yellowing, and then next thing you know, it's just brown. I mean, I would have never dreamed we could kill volunteer corn.
I do know it's, we see it be more slow reacting, and you do have to wait 10 days, 14 days, and it will start killing it, but it is starving that weed or that grass to death. And so it does take a little bit of time. We want to make sure that those are, actively growing weeds, and that's what's going to go ahead and take care of it.
Yep.
With your experience this year, Steve, is there any advice you'd give to growers as we look towards next year? Maybe a way to make this better use on their farm? Anything that they should make sure they do with this iGrowth technology to make it successful?
We did have one guy north of Dodge City that put it, the big talk that we saw and everything was taking care of the pigweeds. We didn't want it for that, because like I said, we have areas of grass that just kills milo. And so that was my initial thought, because we've never had anything to do that with. Because we're dry land, rain, we can put $800 an acre on our milo. If we don't get a rain, you're gonna have weeds. It's all about timing. So what we like about it is we go with our we plant our milo, and like I said, this will work if Mother Nature helps us out. But so we go in, and with the atrazine and the Imiflex and everything in that tank mix, then that's on the ground. And I'm hoping that gives us a week or two that if we get a rain, then that's coming in there and helping those late season pigweeds. That's perfect scenario. Now, will that happen every year? No, it's not going to. It's just not. But if it happens, I mean, that's a home run. You're taking care of your grasses. You got a second barrier there for pigweeds. That'll be beautiful. But I did have a guy, like I said, almost everybody out there, we initially wanted to see it for grasses. But I had a guy north of Dodge, had it on a circle, and he called us because he can make the rain. So he sprayed, and he called me and said it was the best pigweed control he'd ever seen.
Oh, awesome.
And that was good news to hear.
Yes. I think it's fair to say as we give growers advice next year, let's make sure we're doing it in the right environmental conditions, that temperatures are correct, you add the right tank mix partners in there, and really let's look at it, if you're gonna go a post application, let's try to do a planned post, and that way you are getting that control. We're not trying to treat it as a rescue treatment. And if growers do that, and the growers that did that this year, we've seen a lot of success with.
Yeah, a lot of success. And there's a lot of success to come.
Yep.
I guarantee it. I've seen enough to know that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, Steve.
bet.
Really appreciate having you here, and we look forward to this next growing season.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, gentlemen. Now we will bring on your screens Dr. Ben Byer and grower Travis Leonard to dive a little deeper into a first-year experience with iGrowth, and our experts will be answering questions live here shortly. Dr. Ben.
Welcome everyone to Sorghum Frontiers. I'm here with Travis Leonard, who farms out of Sublette, Kansas. This was his, of course, as with other people, his first year of growing iGrowth sorghum from Alta Seeds, and he's grown Alta Seeds in the past. So Travis, why iGrowth, and what made you interested in the herbicide tolerance technology we're offering?
Okay, sorghum production on my farm, it has been a challenge to control weeds. You get one shot at it traditionally, and the iGrowth gave us an opportunity to come in there on a planned post to really help with weed control, and the results this year were really tremendous. Those fields were clean.
Right. So very good first year experiences. And as far as weed control, I mean, Mr. Sterling just alluded to it, but did you see both grass and broadleaf weed control as well?
Yes, absolutely. I was very impressed having grass pressures in irrigated fields. The grass was just not there after the Imiflex application. The volunteer corn has been a problem on those rotations, and controlling the volunteer corn was a pleasant surprise. It really produced a clean field, and it's going to give us the opportunity to do those rotations on irrigation where we have declining water, where we are now putting sorghum into those rotations on irrigation to keep those weed pressures low where they need to be.
Right. As far as crop response, did you see any crop response on the turn rows or anything like that, or any yellow flashing or anything like that in the field?
No, the crop safety was tremendous with Imiflex. When we sprayed, like Steve said, you couldn't tell the field was sprayed from the sorghum. It was just as healthy as can be.
Yeah. What about plans for 2022 as we start to think about the next growing season? There's a lot of things going on out there with fertilizer prices and everything. How do you see iGrowth and sorghum playing a role in your farm next year?
Absolutely. iGrowth is going to play a role on my farm next year. I'm putting sorghum back into the rotation as a crop that can take advantage of lower inputs and still produce a high yield. Definitely going to be planting the iGrowth next year again.
Yeah. What about other growers in your area? Are they also interested in the iGrowth? And
absolutely, there was a lot of interest in the iGrowth. I spoke to a grower that conveyed to me that had been able to grow sorghum on a field that traditionally they had not been able to grow sorghum on, and had tremendous weed control with it. And so they were very, very, very impressed with that.
All right, very good. Were you able to look at any of the second generation hybrids this year?
I had a test plot on dry land and got a good look at the second generation products, and I'm extremely excited to put them into the fields next year. I think they are going to bring us to a level of sorghum production that is going to be very profitable to farmers in the future.
Yeah. So definitely some advantages with the second generation.
Yes.
You had mostly 1142 this year.
I did. I had a lot of 1142 this year. For the most part, it performed well. I think the next generation is going to be that much better in the future.
All right. Very good.
Hi, Ben, Dr. Ben. This is Dean Loftus, marketing lead here at Alta Seeds. I've had several sent directly to me on chat. I don't know whether or not on the screen here, but I have a couple here. They're general, looks like, about iGrowth. Does iGrowth grain have to be channeled?
No, iGrowth is you take it straight into the elevator. It is, it's just into the chain now. Is you can sell it to the elevators directly.
All right, good. I have one here that looks like it's an Imiflex question, so I would refer this to Dr. Bryant. For managing sandburr with Imiflex, what is the best herbicide program to use?
Sure, thanks, Dean. Yeah, so that's definitely an important one. I know sandburr is one of our more troublesome weeds that sorghum growers will battle. And just like with any of our programs, I strongly recommend a group 15 herbicide such as moccasin. That's UPL's formulation of S-metolachlor. And I recommend that really with any Imiflex program we have going out, but especially when we're targeting grassy sandburr. So with sandburr, we've got a 2EE label that encompasses that weed. And what it notes on that label is that for that optimized activity from Imiflex, and what we've seen in these commercial fields this year, whether we use Imiflex pre or post, having that group 15 in the program is critical. And that's what's going to help us really get after that weed. And so if we're using Imiflex pre, going after sandbur, just like our other use patterns, we need to make sure we have that rainfall or overhead irrigation that will activate our soil activity. And if opting for that post application of Imiflex, again, still having that group 15 there in your program, making sure we're aggressive with our adjuvants is important. With sandbur, I'd always recommend being somewhere on the side of UAN, that 2.5% volume per volume, opting for an MSO over COC at that 1 to 2% volume per volume ratio. And most importantly with that, targeting that sandbur when it's small. So prior to it reaching 2 to 3 inches in height, we employ those practices. You can see really good success utilizing the iGrowth system, encompassing Imiflex and battling grassy sandbur.
All right, I guess you can stay on, Dr. Bryant. I have another one that just came up on the chat. What is the rotation to weed after an application of Imiflex?
Yeah, so that's one we pay attention to. Generally speaking, that rotation to wheat after an application of Imiflex, so conventional wheat, will be 3 months if we have 10 inches of cumulative rainfall or overhead irrigation that's received in that period prior to planting of wheat. So if we don't receive that 10 inches, then there are a few other parameters we need to pay attention to, such as what is our soil pH and what are the tillage practices implemented in that field. Those will dictate what that ultimate length of the rotation would be. But one way to simplify things a lot, with any clearfield wheat varieties or clearfield crops in general, that plant back time after an Imiflex application is 0 days.
Okay, and another Imiflex question for you is, are there any restrictions to when the Imiflex can be sprayed?
Yeah, no, that's another good one too. So, I mean, really the simple part of it is Imiflex is incredibly flexible. We have a very wide application window. So what that means, like we saw in those videos, we can apply it anywhere from that pre-emergence timing, shortly or after planting, all the way up to the 20 inches in crop height. So what that means is we don't need to wait for the crop to reach a certain height prior to that application of Imiflex. So targeting weeds when they're small is always important. That allows us to actually hit those weeds when the weeds dictate that application and not when the crop is dictating that application. So we maintain that flexibility. And when it comes to tank mix restrictions, there are only a few we need to pay attention to. But like we saw, Imiflex is a broad spectrum chemistry. But if growers are still going after some of the more troublesome broadleaf weeds, we can include 2,4-D or dicamba and atrazine in that tank. Now, the only products that Imiflex cannot be tank mixed with are Peak, Ally, Husky, and then iron. But really, ultimately, what this gives us is a new level of weed control, and it has demonstrated flexibility across geographies and herbicide programs.
Okay, well, we'll keep monitoring the chat, answer questions directly back on chat for ones that come in. Now, I guess, James, let's go ahead and do the seed giveaway. You have that?
Yes, sir. I'm excited to be able to announce the first winner for the Alta Seeds seed giveaway in the amount of $3,000 worth of seed is, drum roll please, Brian Bauer from Fairbury, Nebraska. An Alta Seed representative will contact you later about the prize. That's exciting. We'll continue with our presentation now and ask that you continue to submit those questions via the chat function. Please don't hesitate to put some questions in the chat. It helps us be able to use the experts as they're here for us to answer questions right away for you. If we can't get to one though, remember, you can always contact with a specific question your Alta Seeds customer service line at 844-529-3420, and they'll be happy to try to answer those questions for you specifically. Now to share information about Empyr Premier Forages and to give some exciting news about the introduction of iGrowth herbicide tolerance into this lineup is Mark Kirk, Eastern Western U.S. Account Manager for Alta Seeds, as well as the familiar face of Dr. Zach, Dr. Ryan and Brian Battles to talk agronomics with Imiflex on Empyr.
Hi, Mark Kirk, Forage Specialist and Regional Sales Manager for Alta and Advanta Seeds here in Hereford, Texas at our Sorghum Frontiers. Today I'd like to talk to you about our Empyr Premier Forages lineup. Last year we launched the Empyr Premier Forages lineup and had a great success all across the country with all of these hybrids. You know, in this Empyr Premier Forage lineup, we bring together the best of the best hybrids, anchored by the highest yielding, greatest agronomics that we can. And in that, we bring together those traits that exceed all other expectations and exceed all other hybrids in the industry. And in this, we bring together things like BMR. And we take seriously the BMR 6. And we bring in BMR 6 for the highest digestibility, the greatest palatability, for increased milk and meat production on all different kinds of operations. We also bring together in this lineup Brocritic dwarfs. In that Brocritic dwarfs, we are shortening the stature of that plant, increasing the standability, stacking those leaves in closer together where we have a higher leaf to stem ratio without sacrificing the high yields that you would expect in our Empyr lineup. We also have photoperiod sensitives. Photoperiod sensitives allows us to extend out a harvest window for those busy operators who have more than just forage harvest on their mind and going on in their operation. On the opposite side of that, for those short growing seasons, for those northern regions, we have dry stock. Dry stock allows us to be able to get that hybrid harvested on time with lower moisture so that we can get a good packing and a good fermentation when we ensile that. Also bringing in Aphix. Aphix is the highest rated sugarcane aphid tolerant hybrids in all of the industry. Our rigorous testing and rigorous observations of those aphid tolerance allow us to have confidence in saying that sugarcane aphids won't destroy your forage. And we have 3 hybrids in that lineup this year. In fact, one of them is the new 7424 that you can see right here behind me. And this year, I'm excited to tell you that we've added another characteristic into the Empyr Premier Forage lineup, and it's iGrowth, herbicide tolerance. We have the first in the industry herbicide tolerant forage sorghum on the market this year. I'm excited to introduce you today to ADVF 8484 IG. This is the industry's first and only herbicide-tolerant forage sorghum with our iGrowth technology. The iGrowth technology allows us to spray pre- and post-emergent herbicide. That herbicide is our companion herbicide, Imiflex. You know, a lot of times in a forage field, we don't always consider the impact that weeds have. You know, weeds negatively impact the forage quality. You know, we do a lot of work here at Alta Seeds in Advanta, testing the forage quality and bringing to the industry the highest forage quality that we can. And, you know, and we test these hybrids, but you know what we don't test? We don't test weeds. Nobody knows what the forage quality of those weeds are, and I can tell you they're going to negatively impact the forage quality. Not only that, but those weeds are going to rob and steal from these plants. You know, we put down lots of money putting down fertilizer, putting down inputs, making sure that this plant has all that it needs to reach its genetic potential for yield. And anytime we allow weeds to grow in that field, those weeds rob that. They take from that. They take up that nitrogen. They take up that phosphorus. They take up that potassium that you spent money putting there to feed that plant to get the best forage that you can. And not only that, you know, we plant forage sorghum in areas a lot of times that are water stressed or drought stressed areas. Whereas water's a precious commodity because these forage sorghums handle the heat, they handle less water than corn silage. And here, if we allow weeds to grow in a field, what we're doing is we're allowing that weed to take up that precious commodity that we need for that forage sorghum. So here with ADVF 8484 IG in the Empyr Premier Forage lineup, we know that this is something that's going to continue to revolutionize the forage industry.
Brian Battles with UPL. Today we're in the field with Dr. Bryant to talk about Empyr Forage Sorghums and iGrowth. And Dr. Bryant, this last year, I mean, I really anticipate we're going to see some of the great things that have happened from iGrowth grain sorghum also into the Empyr Forage Sorghums. What can we really expect?
Of course, yeah. So one of the things I think about when I think of forage sorghum is traditionally in the past, we haven't had a lot of options in terms of being able to use certain herbicides like we do in grain sorghum or even more so in corn. But now with the introduction of iGrowth into forage sorghum, we can now use the registered companion chemistry Imiflex either as a pre or post-emergence application to iGrowth forage sorghum.
You know, you talk about pre and post. I mean, I just think about it from just many days of working with forage sorghums, and those things are going to grow pretty fast. I mean, do you really think the pre is probably going to be the better way than the post, just for a good efficacy of control and a good contact?
Definitely we've seen that increased activity from those pre-emergence applications with Imiflex, especially on our more troublesome weeds. But again, with Imiflex, we do get that versatility, being able to go pre or post. And one thing to consider with forage sorghum is it has a very aggressive growth habit. It'll shoot out of the ground, canopy over, especially depending on what type of setting you're planting into. So we can really leverage those herbicide programs, fine tune our timings, and to really get a new level of weed control by implementing Imiflex with iGrowth sorghum.
Now, I think back in the days of my consulting days, and every time that we used a herbicide, especially on a forage sorghum, any kind of a food or fodder, the big thing is, what is our harvest interval? Because I know a lot of growers are going to be really, really concerned about that. What can you tell us about that?
Of course, and especially when we get into the feed side of things, that's always really important to consider. What is that post-harvest interval? Are there any sort of feeding restrictions attached to the use of this product with this system? And the short answer for that is no. With Imiflex, we have a 0-day post-harvest interval, no feeding restrictions, as well as a very friendly environmental profile for this chemistry when used with iGrowth grain and forage sorghum.
I know moisture is important, fertility is important. Again, the herbicide is extremely important, but how can you explain to these growers that we sure don't want to scrimp on that? Even though we know that forage sorghum is going to canopy real quick, how can you really tell these guys to be sure and get that done?
Of course, and you know, just like you said, Brian, cutting corners on a herbicide program, 9 times out of 10, that's going to lead to some undesirable results. And forage sorghum is no exception to that. What we really need to pay attention to is controlling a lot of these weeds before they even emerge, whether that is more of a delayed pre or a true pre, or even a post-emergence application with Imiflex or this system. Controlling those weeds before they get off and running, that's what's going to preserve our highest amount of tonnage and preserve the highest level of quality that we can expect with these premier Empyr Forage lines, especially with the introduction of iGrowth and Imiflex into these systems. Now, with those different application timings, of course, growers are always going to want to know with any traded sorghum, what's that crop safety profile look like? And everything we continue to see is growers can expect an incredibly high degree of crop safety, whether that's a pre-emergence application or post-emergence application to this iGrowth forage sorghum. You know, just like with grain sorghum, especially with iGrowth, having a comprehensive herbicide program is incredibly important. So we really need to be sure we're understanding what products we can use in forage sorghum and not confuse those with what we're able to use in grain sorghum. So for the most part, it is relatively similar, but there are a few things to keep in mind. So with forage sorghum, our herbicide options are relatively limited in comparison to grain. But that's what's so exciting with iGrowth is it allows us to use Imiflex with this system as well. So a new herbicide option for forage sorghum. Traditionally, what I think of when I look at those forage sorghum herbicide programs, we want to have a group 15 in there. S-metolachlor, or UPL's formulation of S-metolachlor called Moccasin 2+, is a great option to use with Safin forage sorghum seed, or really any Safin sorghum seed. A lot of growers will also elect to have atrazine in that program as well. That'll really help us on the broadleaf side of things. And we combine those programs together and introduce Imiflex into that system with iGrowth forage sorghum, you're gonna see a really lights out program that'll help you get activity on some of your most troublesome weeds. The broadleaf weeds, of course, but really what is paramount with Imiflex in this system is that newfound ability to get a higher level of grass control, whether that's from a pre-emergence application or a post-emergence application. Having that system in place with Imiflex and iGrowth is really gonna bring our weed control to a new level.
All right, so I'm here with Mark Kirk, our forage specialist, and Mark, I'm an agronomist. I cover the whole U.S. I get a lot of questions from a lot of different people, and they're always pertaining to the crops that we sell, our sorghum products. And I'm really comfortable answering their agronomic and product placement questions, but one thing that always escapes me is our nutrition questions that we get. So can you give me kind of the bullet points of what an agronomist like me and those in the audience are struggling with when we go read a nutrition report?
No, that's a really good question, Zach. And I'm going to warn you, you're opening up a Pandora's box, right? And so this is one of my passions, and this is one of the things that I really love to talk about, and I really love for guys to understand. Okay, and the idea there is that, you know, a lot of times we'll get a silage analysis or a forage analysis from a lab, and man, it just looks like Greek. It just looks like math. It looks like the most complicated algebra you've ever seen, and guys just glaze over. And then I'll go to talk to an agronomy guy like you, Dr. Eder, and by the time I get 3 or 4 minutes into it, they're glazing over. And so I'll give you my top 4: crude protein, NDFD 30, UNDF 240. Okay, and then sugars. Those are my top 4 that they need to be looking at.
So Mark, 2 of those I'm familiar with, and those are our fiber digestibility scores.
Sure.
So which customers of ours in the audience are really going to be needing to lean on those, and what kind of value should they be looking for on the actual nutrition report?
Sure, that's a good question. So when a guy grabs that nutrition report, whether he be a beef guy or a dairy guy, crude protein is going to be one that he's going to want to focus in on. You know, most of the time when we're adding protein to a diet, we're either adding maybe some alfalfa to the ration, but definitely soybeans and soybean meal. And I don't know about you, but soybean meal right now is really expensive. So if we can grow that crude protein in that forage, that's where we're really going to want to be. Okay, and so crude protein is going to be one of those places that is going to be essential for either one of those 2 groups to look at. And that's one of those numbers that the higher the better. Okay, and you know, as an agronomist, how do we get that crude protein up in those plants?
Definitely from our nitrogen fertilizer.
From our nitrogen fertilizer. And kind of one of the interesting little secrets there is that when a lab is testing for crude protein, all they're really testing for is nitrogen in that plant. And so they're using that to calculate out that crude protein fraction. So as long as we're feeding this plant enough nitrogen, and I think that that's one of these areas, Zach, the guys who grow sorghum sometimes think of this as kind of this strong, rugged plant, and I don't have to feed it as much as I need to. But if you're going to grow high quality, high tonnage silage, you're going to need to feed it, and nitrogen's going to drive that crude protein.
On all of our agronomic recommendations, we're typically looking at about a 1.25 pounds per growing day in the field.
Yep.
And that's really going to put them on an optimal maximum use without going over. And obviously we have some nitrate issues if you go too high.
Yep.
But that's a really good cost savings for those growers. Now when it comes to those digestible fibers though, how is that? What are we looking for there?
So digestible fiber, we're going to be looking at 2 fractions there. One is the NDFD 30, and that's that neutral detergent fiber digestibility at 30 hours. And so when we're measuring that digestibility, really what we're saying is there's this much of this fiber that's digestible at this certain time point, okay? And so that NDFD 30 on a BMR, we're going to see that in the 60s, okay? And that 60% of that NDF is digestible in 30 hours. And that's really where we're going to see that high quality. That's kind of the metric for those BMRs. Now a conventional non-BMR, we're probably going to see that in the mid 50s is where that's going to be. And that's where we're going to want that even for a high quality non-BMR forage sorghum or sorghum Sudan or Sudan grass. That's where that one's going to be. And then the other fraction that we want to look at is called UNDF 240. Okay, and UNDF is the undigestible fraction.
So that's the part that the cow is not being able to utilize.
That's the part that the cow is absolutely not going to be able to utilize. But not only is that, as we think about it, as waste, right? She doesn't utilize it, she doesn't do it, but it limits, the higher that number goes, it really limits the intake that they can have, whether it be a dairy cow or a growing steer or even a mama cow that for beef that we're looking at. If we get that number much above 10 or 11%, what we're really doing is she's going to only eat so much of that, or a growing steer is only going to eat so much of that, they're going to get full and they're going to quit eating. Okay. So the lower we can keep that fraction, the lower we can keep that UNDF 240, the better off, and the more we're going to drive that dry matter intake and have increased average daily gains for the beef guys and increased milk production for the dairy guys.
Now you mentioned sugars, and I do get a question about this a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of the growers out there are maybe looking for a high energy food.
Yes.
To give to some of their different feed scenarios. Where are our growers utilizing that higher sugar, and what products should they be looking at for that?
Sure, absolutely. So on that forage analysis, first of all, there's going to be one of 2 ways that that's going to be represented. And either it's going to be represented as ethanol soluble carbohydrates, ESC, or it's going to be water-soluble carbohydrates, WSC. I prefer looking at the WSC. It's really what's more soluble, okay? So that's what's soluble in water, and that's what's going to be rapidly available for energy for those animals. And one of the interesting things is, Zach, you know agronomically that when we grow sorghum, it's hard to sometimes compare it to corn silage, right?
Very much so.
And a guy's going to be like, well, that doesn't have as much energy. But they're usually looking at that starch energy, and that starch value is going to be lower in a forage sorghum just because we don't have that ear of corn. But what this forage sorghum is going to bring is the sugars, and that's the energy that it's really going to be able to make up for some of that starch that we're losing out on in without growing corn silage. And so a guy there, and so those numbers are going to be different. The ethanol soluble carbohydrate is going to be different number and typically a lower value than the water soluble carbohydrate. But really, it's the higher we can get those, the better it is, and the more energy there is rapidly available to those cows.
So it sounds like products that we have in the lineup that don't produce a lot of starch, a lot of grain, are going to have a lot more of this WSC, the water soluble part of the plant. Which of those products are you looking at in your rations to kind of favor?
So a lot of those would be the photoperiod sensitives, okay? Because what we know is that a plant begins to basically take up those sugars out of the plant and deposit them in the head and make it starch. Any grass does that, and so anything that is longer maturing in that way. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we're cautioned about is, even though we're putting on the starch, right? Even though we're putting on the starch, this plant is still alive. This plant is still photosynthesizing sugars, and there's still a lot of sugars in that plant, okay? And so, but a guy who really wants to optimize that really needs to kind of be looking at either a photoperiod sensitive or taking their sorghum sedans in a multi-cut. Instead of just letting it go to maturity and putting on a head, taking that in a multi-cut, we typically say the rule of thumb there is 40 days or 40 inches going in and cutting that, and you're really capturing all of those sugars without them being cannibalized out to starch. In summary, we need to be looking at crude protein, NDFD30, UNDF240, and sugars.
So Mark, I'm glad we got to do this. I know it's a lot of information, but the beauty of video is you can watch it over and over and make sure we learn these principles of nutrition. It's the biggest challenge in growing forages today. So I'm glad we got to do this, and I'm glad the audience got to hear it for the first time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Now we are going to bring onto the screen from Rome, Georgia, Josh Baker, the general manager of Southeast AgriSeed, and Mark Kirk to talk about Empyr and Forage Agronomics. And we'll take your questions. If you're just now joining us, you'll be able to catch up with what you've missed in the recording that will be posted after this on hpj.com/Sorghum Frontiers. To ask a question, please just click on that chat button at the bottom of the screen and type your question in the pop-up box that appears. That way, once our guests get done talking, we have questions ready for them, and they'll be able to answer those right here live for you. Gentlemen, let's hear what you have to say.
Hey, thanks, James. So I am Mark Kirk. I am the regional sales manager for Alta Seeds and forage specialist. I'm here with Josh Baker down here in Rome, Georgia. And so Josh and I have just been talking about some of the hybrids that he's had experience with. Josh, I've known Josh for probably more years than we ought to really talk about. But anyway, he's had lots of experience with our products, not only in selling them and distributing them, but also in using them. And so he's got a really unique perspective on several of those. And so Josh, I'm just gonna ask you, if you had top 3 products that you think about in this area, in the Southeast, what kind of product would we be looking at?
So, just thinking about three products, I mean, it really, a lot of it depends on kind of what your management is and what your strategies are, what you're feeding. I mean, there are a lot of questions that come into play. But just kind of top three products that are really intriguing and have had a good amount of success for us. So 9301, this one's been in the lineup for quite a few years, and I every time we keep coming back to it. If I have a grower that is looking for something that's just real versatile, really high quality, has a good wide harvest window, it makes really good baleage. We can graze that product, so it's got a lot of features that we really enjoy. The BMR6 characteristic too, from a nutritional standpoint, is really outstanding.
So 9301 is a Sudan grass, Down here, can we make dry hay out of that?
You know, it's always a challenge to make dry hay out of any product in the sorghum or sedan grass lineup. But if you're going to do that, the 9301 would be the one to look at. It has a dry stalk characteristic, so we're able to get that one drier faster. That's also a good characteristic for guys that are just making baleage. I just want to speed that drying time down to that ideal baleage moisture as well.
So 9301, what other? Is there a sorghum sedan that you really like in the Empyr line?
So I really like the photoperiod sensitivity. You know, the photoperiod sensitive products are really good for us because we tend to kind of stretch that harvest out a little bit, maybe a little more relaxed on management of timeliness on harvest. So we like that kind of ability to go late season without those products going to head. So 6520, of course, with the aphid tolerance, that one was a real popular one this past year. And there are others in the photoperiod sensitive lineup that we like, but that one in particular because of especially in the deep south, the consideration to aphids and managing those, you know, they haven't been as big of an issue the past couple of years, but it's still a consideration. So if we can have all the other characteristics, the BMR6, the photoperiod sensitivity stacked on the aphid tolerance, we get a really good attractive product.
So, you know, earlier when in the portion where Zach and I were talking, we were talking about how that photoperiod sensitive allows that plant to keep photosynthesizing sugars and whatever. And I talked about a 40-day, 40-inch kind of cut interval as being the optimum, but with your guys down here, sometimes you see that stretch out a little bit longer.
Yeah, so we see it stretch out. We may take that first cut, you know, early or timely, but then those later cuts may stretch out. It's kind of a fine line. You start to get to a place in the season where you say, you know, do we go for a third cut or do we just let the second cut go longer? And I think that's where we really see the difference in the photoperiod sensitive products. We can let that second cut go out longer, get some really nice forage quality. Not lose that quality because of the maturity and the headiness of the plant. So, you know, that's really kind of it gives us options, I guess, and it also still gives us the option of cutting on a more aggressive schedule and getting a higher quality, higher digestibility product. So it gives us options.
Okay, and so I got a sedan grass, a sorghum sedan. What about just a straight forage sorghum? What's kind of your go-to down here?
So, you know, BMRs are definitely, you know, we've got to think about BMR, especially on our dairies and operations where quality is the most important thing.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you know, for a lot of the guys that are either raising beef cows or trying to grow stockers in this region, the 8322 with the aphid tolerance, and also just the overall yield and the overall, you know, top end yield potential on that. We need something that's resilient, something that can tolerate some adverse, you know, conditions and climate, weather patterns. Standability is important. 8322 has that. And we need something that's going to produce a good amount of grain too, and have a good grain to forage ratio there. So 8322 is a standout forage sorghum, again, for our region and for a specific category of livestock.
Yeah, so we actually took 8322 in the Indiana this year, southern part of Indiana, at the Purdue bull test, and they were wanting to, you know, they wanted to grow those bulls, but they didn't want to put too much finish on them. They didn't want them to get too fat, and so we thought the 8322 would just be a superb product. And come to find out, as far as agronomically and harvesting it, they're very, very happy with it. And the standability this year has been greater than the older product that we had, 8301. And so we've definitely seen that as an improvement over those. And so, yeah, so 9301, 6520, and then the 8322 are kind of three products that really kind of stand out in your mind.
And there are other products. I think one thing that makes the Alta lineup so exciting and so good for us is we cover a wide region. You know, we cover from North and South Carolina to all the way out to getting into Louisiana, even some in North Florida. So we're covering a wide region. We have customers that have a wide, we're covering a wide customer base too, dairies, beef, you know, guys grazing, guys harvesting baleage. I mean, it's the full spectrum. So we need options. And I think we get that with the Alta lineup. Yeah, those are three standouts, but there are a lot of other good products that we work with, and I really like the depth of lineup overall.
Good. So yeah, so here we are in Rome. You've heard from us, and so yeah, if there's any questions out there that we can answer, man, we're ready for some of those.
Hey, Mark, we did have a couple of questions come in here. Actually, I think Josh kind of hit on this first one, at least anyway. How important is aphid tolerance to forage quality?
Well, I mean, so it's more important to agronomics, and agronomics, leads to quality. So good agronomics leads to good quality. If we lose the leaves, we're left with stem and I won't say anything about toxins or anything like that it could cause, but that's just what I see at the ground level. Is we get a dry down is a lot quicker. When dry down's faster, we can't catch up to that plant if we're talking about a forage sorghum harvest. We really want to get that ideal moisture so that it feeds, ferments, and it feeds like we want it to. If aphids are there and they're attacking it, we can't catch up to that plant, and we can't catch up to the aphids. So that's one way that it affects quality. In a sorghum Sudan, we talked about this earlier a little bit, that the past couple of years haven't been as bad, at least in some areas for aphids. And we have some options with sorghum Sudans and Sudan grasses, even non-aphid tolerant. We do have some options to even just go out and harvest or graze it or try to get ahead of the aphids. But really, the forage sorghum is where we see a big benefit to having something that's going to be aphid tolerant, and of course the grain sorghum, which is a little more limited in our region. But so yeah, that would be my take.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that is that those aphids are feeding on the sugars that are in that plant, and so when we're removing those sugars that could go into fermentation and helping with fermentation, but also just the feed value of those sugars, that's where we're seeing a lot of that the way that aphid pressure would affect forage quality.
Okay, another one real quick here for you, Mark. Does dwarf products really give me the same usable feed levels, and how well does that work?
So yeah, so I like the Bricritic dwarfs. Number one, just kind of going back to that agronomic thing. If I've got a plant that can stand there and withstand storms and whatever and stay alive, it's that. And so. But also we stack those leaves in, and we have a higher leaf to stem ratio, and so that we all know that the leaves are more digestible than the stems, and so therefore we're kind of bouncing up that forage quality there, and so the Bricritic dwarfs definitely bring that. Even something like the 8484 that is a conventional midrib, I have seen and continue to expect that we'll see higher forage quality out of that than maybe we do some other conventional forage sorghums, just because of that leaf to stem ratio there.
I think our last one here, this will be for Dr. Bryant. Does Imiflex work on Johnson grass in a forage situation?
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, that's another one to consider. So if you look on our label for iGrowth under Imiflex, you'll notice Johnson grass and Shattercane are not labeled. Now, that's not just something unique to our system. If you look at some of the other traded sorghum systems, you'll see a similar scenario where Johnson grass and Shattercane are not labeled. So where that comes from, it's not anything to do with efficacy, but that is a result of stewardship and wanting to make sure that we're prolonging the system as long as we can. We need to be good stewards of it. Understand Johnson grass and Shattercane are close relatives of sorghum, whether it's forage or grain. So it comes from stewardship, just making sure that we're not inducing anything by having those weeds labeled.
Okay. All right, James, I think we probably should move on. We'll keep monitoring the chat, maybe go to the next seed giveaway.
Sure. We're announcing the second winner of the Alta seed giveaway, the amount of $4,000 worth of seed, and the winner is Mark Bush from Cimarron, Kansas. An Alta Seed representative will contact you later today about your prize, Mark. Now to talk about the development and effectiveness of Aphix Elite Sugarcane Aphid Tolerance, here once again are Tanner Antonick and Dr. Ben Beyer.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ben Byer. I'm the USA Sorghum Breeding Lead for Advanta and Alta Seeds. and I'm here with Tanner Antonick again. And in this section of Sorghum Frontiers, we're going to talk about our Aphix product lineup.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We sit here in 2021 looking forward to the 2022 growing season. And from where we were a few years back with only one Aphix designated hybrid in the lineup, now we've got 6 filling all the different maturities. So today what we're going to do is we're going to ask questions to Dr. Ben and ask him about how we got these hybrids to the lineup, where they might be fits, and what he's doing down the line. Ben, one of the questions I get quite a bit from growers is, with us having a robust portfolio and leading the industry in sugarcane aphid tolerant hybrids, how did you get us there? How do we have so many products in our portfolio?
As with everything in breeding, it all starts with the data. So our number one breeding goal is yield potential. Now, when the sugarcane aphid hit, we started to notice a large number of the hybrids that we had in testing at that time had some level of sugarcane aphid tolerance. From there, we started screening individual parents to find out which ones had the highest levels of sugarcane aphid tolerance. And some of this is available because of our diverse genetics that we have in our portfolio.
And now, are we looking at multiple parent lines or is it set? What are we looking at there?
We are looking at multiple parent lines. So to my knowledge, a lot of the industry is using the sugarcane aphid tolerance that comes from the pollinator side of the hybrid. But in our screening, we found sources of tolerance with our proprietary germplasm on not only the males, but also the females. And that's been a big game changer for us because new hybrids like G1153, that one has sugarcane aphid tolerance on both the male and the female.
That's really exciting, and it does explain too why we have such a broad portfolio and different maturities, because we're pulling those from so many different sources. You know, I know back in 2016 and early 2017, Advanta made the decision to move our molecular lab back here to the US at your main breeding facility there in College Station. Are you utilizing that molecular lab at all in your aphid tolerant screening?
Oh, very much so. We've mapped out our primary sources of sugarcane aphid tolerance to be able to use marker-assisted selection, and we are using that in the breeding program, specifically on F2 and F3 populations to make sure that we're advancing individual plants that carry strong levels of sugarcane aphid tolerance. In addition to that, we have some other projects in that same realm where some of the additional sources we're checking to see, is it the same genes, or, you know, in our diverse germplasm that I referenced earlier, are we having multiple genes that give us that strong sugarcane aphid tolerance?
Okay. So now I was in College Station back at end of June, 1st of July, and I was taking guys through plots and it was looking just like this. We were colored, we were almost at harvest, and at that same time I saw your planter out there running. What'd you have your team doing out there?
That's a very good question, Tanner. We've noticed specifically in the USA that a lot of the sugarcane aphid infestations come at pre or post flowering. In terms of early stages at planting, you can use a seed applied insecticide, which I highly recommend. But we do those late planted nurseries because whenever we see the highest levels of sugarcane aphid pressure in College Station, it's typically in September. Now, there's not sorghum growing in South and Central Texas typically in September. So by doing that late planting, we get the sorghum plots for the screening nursery to pre or post flowering when that aphid pressure gets really high. And then we're really able to see the genetic differences among not only our materials, but the competition as well. And we also repeat that same process at our breeding station in central Mexico and Irapuato.
Very interesting. So now I know when we talk sugarcane aphid tolerance, especially to industry leaders or to growers, we're typically talking about grain sorghum. But I know we also have a robust forage portfolio. Are you doing anything with our forages on that side?
Of course. We do have an Aphix hybrid on the forage side. It's F8322. That hybrid was developed in my program when we were back here in Hereford. And what's key about that one is the sugarcane aphid tolerance is coming from the female. That hybrid specifically, when we had very high pressure here in Hereford in 2016, you know, you had hybrids that were shiny from all the honeydew on either side of the plot. So you had very high aphid pressure on either side of it. But every one of those plots, that hybrid was experimental, was nice clean leaves as we're seeing now in this Aphix AG1203.
And I know how important that is because we look at grain sorghum, and as long as we can keep the aphids out of the head, it's usually we can harvest it. But on these forages, more honeydew out there, the choppers don't want to get in. It's really a disaster for our forage guys. Now, Ben, as we look forward to this 2022 growing season, I know you've got a lot of new hybrids entering the portfolio. Is there anything new with that Aphix designation growers should be looking at?
Sure. On the forage side, we have the S6520. This is a photoperiod sensitive BMR6 sorghum Sudan grass. It does have our Aphix level designation, so industry leading sugarcane aphid tolerance. On the grain side, for a conventional hybrid, we have the G2165. This one works very well from South Texas through Central Kansas. It's a medium maturity. In addition to that, we also have the G2168, which is an iGrowth and Aphix hybrid. And this one also works well from South and Central Texas all through the Plains region.
Now, Dr. Ben, as we look for when the aphids first popped up and we started doing the aphid tolerance screening, we had a lot of universities working on it. Have things changed since 2015 to now where we're at in 2021? What's the difference?
Back then in 2015, when we really started doing a lot of screening, a lot of it was done via growth chamber at the seedling stage. One of the things that we've changed with our late season planting at College Station and at Irapuato in central Mexico, where we also have a breeding station, is we plant later in the season. In College Station, we plant in the June-July timeframe, and that gets our sorghum to the pre or post flowering stages in September. And that's when we typically have our highest aphid pressure. So we get a very good result looking at not only our hybrids internally, but also being able to look at the competition. Tanner, what have you been seeing or hearing from growers this season in terms of sugarcane aphid pressure?
You know, I would say as we looked at the first part of the season, especially South Texas, Central Texas, and it may have been from that early freeze we got, we didn't see a lot of pressure early. But we did have a lot of delayed crops. And so then late in the season, we had guys having to go out and make applications to take care of the sugarcane aphid issue. What we've really seen though is serious pressure late in the season as we move north. This plot we're in here in Hereford actually had to have an application the other day because we do have susceptible grain sorghum hybrids and forages that help bring them in. And so we did see very heavy levels of infestation here, and you can go ahead and you can look at the sugarcane aphid tracking on NSP's website, and you can see all the locations we are finding aphids this year. The other day I was actually visiting with a new grower out of Arkansas, and he planted some of our 1203 that I'm standing in right now, and he was absolutely ecstatic about how well this product performed. He had to spray his competitor hybrid 2 times this season and never had to make an application for sugarcane aphids on his 1203. So we are getting success stories. So while we aren't seeing aphid pressure everywhere, where it's at, the Aphix designated products are standing out. Now, Dr. Ben, one of the issues I have as I'm going out and meeting with my retail partners and my customers is that they may have planted a competitor product in the past that was classified as aphid tolerant, but at the end of the day, they still had to go out and make that costly application to take care of an infestation. What advice would you give them?
Well, Tanner, I would definitely tell them to be taking a look at an Aphix hybrid. Naturally, we do more than just our late planted season screenings. We also verify the data with third parties, and so we still do some seedling screening as well. What we find with our Aphix products is that they have season-long sugarcane aphid tolerance. It's not just early season like in some of the competitors. From a global perspective, the sugarcane aphid has moved as far south as Argentina now. Those breeding programs that we have in other parts of the world, since we are a global company, we are sending lines that carry sugarcane aphid tolerance that were developed here in the United States to be used in hybrids for Central America and South America because of the amount of problems that they're having down there and just the season-long tolerance that we're getting with our hybrids.
Thank you, Ben. I do know the Aphix program originated here in North America in your program, and it's exciting to see that now trickle out to our other partner countries down in South America and Central America, and it really shows the tolerance that you've been able to breed into our portfolio. I will make sure I tell the growers, if you didn't have good success your first time with a competitor product, give one of these a shot because you may have had a product with great early season tolerance, but lacked that end of season tolerance that our Aphix products do have. It has been very exciting to see this program go from just a hybrid or two, expand all the way up to a full portfolio, especially with that added aphid tolerance in an iGrowth hybrid. It's extremely exciting. I do get the luxury of talking to growers on a daily basis, all the way from South Texas to Western Kansas over to Arkansas where they have extreme aphid pressure. And year in and year out, we have proof that these products do offer the industry-leading aphid tolerance growers need to have an easier, safer harvest. Thank you for joining us.
And now to share about how Advanta and Alta Seeds are using drone technology to improve quality and agronomic recommendations is Dr. David Horne, Agronomic Supervisor for Advanta.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Horne, and I'm the Phenomics Supervisor for our Advanta Seeds Global R&D program. My role is to work with our plant breeders to integrate new technology that facilitates an identification and collection of traits that directly impact our growers' yield. With recent technological advances in the field of agriculture, such as soil EC readers, weather stations, ground robots, and even satellite imagery, we can assess which traits you need to grow on your farms to maximize yields. One of the hot topics in the field of agriculture lately, and one that's used extensively with our plant breeders, are the use of unmanned aerial systems, or better known as drones. Here with me today are 3 examples of the many different types of drones you could be using not only on your farms, but also in research. Our first type of drone with me today is one that is used extensively by our sales and seed production technology team. It's also one that can be used by our growers. It's compact and light, easy to put an eye in the sky, assess any problems you may have, and then take a plan of action, all from the edge of the field. This drone is great for a day like today when we've had over an inch of rain, we can't get out there, and it may take lots of hours and time just to assess any damage that's occurred. Our second drone type is one that could be classified as the powerhouse of our fleet. It allows our R&D scientists to start assessing certain traits that allow us to better classify our bloom timing, plant height, and even tillering percentage. By taking this drone and then deploying it across the US and our global research stations, we have better confidence in delivering to you the traits that we know will perform great on your acres. Our third drone type with me today is one that's very similar to the second, in that it still measures red, green, blue, a sensor that's very similar to the one in your cell phone. The only difference is now we're starting to get into those traits that we can't see with the naked eye. It's starting to look for those wavelengths that are in the infrared and red edge regions. What this allows us to do is better quantify and correct spatial effects due to iron chlorosis in your field, but also identify those SCA tolerant hybrids that go into our Aphix lineup. It also allows us to start assessing both the yield and quality of our forage lines for brachytic and photoperiod sensitive lines. So please, join us as we continue to modernize both the breeding and production of sorghum.
Thank you for that, Dr. Horne. Remember, we're still collecting your questions via the chat function. If you have specific questions, you can always call Alta Seeds customer service at 844-529-3420. But until that time period, I do believe we have a couple questions. Dean, did you have those ready for us?
Yeah, I've seen a couple here for Dr. Ben and my team here. This is about sugarcane aphids. Is there any way to predict how far north aphids are moving annually to plan to purchase a tolerant or not?
Yeah, so naturally, from what we've seen both in Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma, is that sugarcane aphid populations are being monitored. They do seem to overwinter, but for whatever reason, especially here in the high plains, they typically disappear close to planting. Now, to predict how far exactly they'll move, that's pretty hard to do. But there are sugarcane aphid trackers through the National Sorghum Producers and Checkoff that we're actually co-sponsoring for that.
Yes, Dr. Ben, that is correct. And every year we'll be updating that. That's a great way to track their movement throughout the year real time. And another question for you here, farther south where aphids are continuous, what are the yields like compared to northern planted non-tolerant where there's very little? Do we have any data on yield differences where there's heavy infestations versus not?
Yeah, we have a lot of R&D data as far as as comparing northern and southern hybrids. Us and the competition. There are some products in everyone's lineup that work in South Texas through Kansas. Ultimately, our number one breeding goal, as I said, is yield potential. That being said, in a lot of the R&D plots, because we need the data. And we don't want to just select on sugarcane aphid tolerance because there's so many, not just the competitors, but we even have some susceptible hybrids still in our trials. That's our own genetics, and so we have to control the sugarcane aphids in those trials. And so in R&D, we've generated a lot of data looking at the yield difference between what would be an Aphix and Alta versus sugarcane aphid tolerant hybrids from other places to those susceptibles. Now, if you're curious if Aphix technology lowers the yield, that is not the case. That all goes back to genetic background and has nothing to do with the genes conferring sugarcane aphid tolerance in our Aphix lineup.
Yeah. We have one last one here that was, you kind of hit on in the video actually, but just in brief, top of the trees here, how is sugarcane aphid tolerance achieved?
It's natural mutations that occur within sorghum. None of this is gene editing or anything like that. And it's just a type of host plant resistance where it seems to be a non-preference for the host plant. So, and then there's other forms out there where, as far as something that actually acts against the aphid, that I'm sure there are sources out there that have been studied, but from what we've seen, it's just a simple non-preference in our background, and also additional genes that help to confer drought tolerance, because the aphid does pull sap and other things out of the plant. So it does take things out of the plant that it needs to grow and survive. And even with some of our moderate tolerance, it gets hammered by the sugarcane aphid, but it's still going to finish grain versus, a susceptible that could be completely 100% dead. And I even wonder about how much grain would actually be able to be harvested off of that field. Great example is 5 years ago in Assyria, Kansas. I mean, the grower had obviously planted something that was susceptible. The entire outside of the field was dead, probably very low test weight. We walked into our plots and, there's what are now Aphix hybrids next to competitor, SCA tolerant hybrids. And, ours are green, going to finish grain, and theirs are almost dead.
All right, James, I guess let's go to our final seed giveaway.
Great. Now, before our last segment, let's take a moment to announce today's grand prize of $5,000 worth of Alta Seeds grain or forage sorghum seed is Scott Anderhart from Zenda, Kansas. And with that being said, this is wrapping up the third Alta Seeds Sorghum Frontiers Virtual Field Day. All of us here want to thank you for watching and participating, and we wish you all a great 2022 growing season. We'll have our presenters' contact information available on the registration website after this, so feel free to reach out to them with any questions we didn't get a chance to answer here live. This virtual field day will be recorded, and we will be posting it soon after on www.hbj.com/sorghumfrontiers. And the link will also be available at www.altaseeds.com. And for the last parting words, we'll talk to Rusty Bevel, North American Director of Sales for Advanta Seeds.
Hi, I'm Rusty Bevel, Director of Sales for Advanta North America. As you can see, the commercial launch of iGrowth was a tremendous success in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of acres were planted to iGrowth across the entire United States, which gave our growers a chance to see iGrowth and Imiflex work on their farm in a large way. This season capped the third full year of selling iGrowth globally and the first year here in the United States. We're excited to launch our Generation 2 hybrids this year, along with the first ever Empyr herbicide-tolerant forage sorghum here in the United States. Our new Generation 2 hybrids are elite sorghum hybrids, even without the added benefit of iGrowth weed control. And our new G2168 brings Aphix elite sugarcane aphid tolerance to our iGrowth lineup for the first time ever. Global demand for sorghum is growing, as is demand for iGrowth. Last year we sold out of iGrowth hybrids completely and are already seeing large demand for Generation 2 hybrids. Please visit your local Alta Seeds retailer or visit sorghumpotential.com where you can book your seed today. Thank you again for watching Sorghum Frontiers, and we look forward to working with you in 2022.